Welcome to The Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Stuart Mandel with Bruce Feldman and Ralph Russo for our third episode of the week. We are going to get into a controversy that erupted this week with a certain AP voter. I feel like the AP poll keeps coming up now that we have the former AP poll guru on the show. And then we are going to talk about some possible breakout performers in this weekend's games and get to your mailbag. Before I bring up the AP poll, Ralph, something I think the people are wondering. Is it Clemson, or as you like to say it, Clemson with a Z?
Yeah, so this is something that has dogged me for a long time. When I had my own podcast, people used to, let me know that I'm inserting a Z where there is an S, and they would generally call me a Yankee and say, please do a better job of pronouncing our school.
Don't people usually insert a P into it normally? And then
Clemson.
Which is actually a good way to make sure you pronounce the S. So that's actually a good trick. Like, there isn't a P in there, but a lot of times you're right. It sounds a little bit, when you have a little bit of a Southern accent, like Clemson. But I'm trying, folks. And I know so it was pointed out to me the other day that I was doing this, and then I listened to the episode, and every time I heard myself say Clemson, it was going through my head like an ice pick. It was going through my ear. So I'm doing the best I can. I will try to be better.
If it makes you feel any better, Dan Wetzel for years on his podcast would call Dabo Swinney.
I think
Jason
Dabo
McIntyre calls him Dabo too.
He's only been in the news for 15 years at this point.
Not from the Deep South.
Yeah.
Speaking of in the news, so Ralph's old ball and chain. I don't know what we want to call this, but the AP top 25 poll, as Stuart said, we've talked about it a little bit, gotten some questions, and then lo and behold, probably about 24 hours ago, a video comes to light on social media involving one of the new AP voters, who's a new USC beat writer who works for the Orange County Register, Haley Sawyer. And the video now in like 24 hours has like 12, as we're just taping this, like 12 million views right now. And it stems from her response to, even though USF went to Florida and beat the Gators, she didn't seem to have seen the game. And then how she addressed it was very flip. And I think that certainly did not sit right with a lot of people. Definitely not with a lot of USF fans, but quite honestly, a lot of people who vote in the poll as well, who looked at that and said, if you're going to do it, you take the responsibility of doing it. You have to understand the responsibility of doing it, and you have to care. We all have, I think, our own kind of feelings on it. Ralph, how much can you tell us about this, and how comfortable are you talking about it?
Well, I'll put it this way, Bruce. Remember when we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about Dave Portnoy and Fox and what went on, what did or did not go on with Ohio State? It's not quite that, because you are an employee of Fox and I am no longer an employee of the Associated Press. But folks, man, there's a lot of conflict here for me. So I am going to be very careful in this conversation. I'm not going to totally sit it out because I feel like I can contribute, but don't expect any hot takes from me here. I still very much admire, respect the people I work with. I have a lot of respect for the poll and the poll process, and voters who I've dealt with for years, who work very hard on a job that is not a job, is just a volunteer situation. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to cede the floor here to Bruce and Stu. If you have some things that you might want to ask me in terms of process and how things get done, I'm happy to weigh in a little bit on that. But for the most part, I'm going to sit back and listen to you guys talk.
Well, I don't have to censor myself in any way. I have no conflict of interest here. And what I would say is, look, she definitely screwed up in terms of, there's no other way to explain moving Florida up and keeping USF out other than she either never saw the score in the first place, or did and then just forgot to when she was. Because like one thing I have sympathy for, having done it, is that thing is due first thing Sunday morning, and if you covered a game that night, like it's a scramble, right? And so maybe in putting it together, she just forgot to include that one. But either way, it wasn't. People make mistakes. It wasn't the mistake that bothered me as much as the explanation, where she came out and said, at the end of the day, I don't think it's that big a deal, right? As in, I don't think the AP poll is that big a deal. And it's like, well, first of all, try telling that to college football fans. They think it's a big deal. And it is, I mean, it is an important, all we ask is that you take the job seriously, and that you are, if you're going to do it, you gotta be, you can't think that, right? You have to realize the responsibility, and you guys can fill in things you think I'm missing here, but the AP poll determines the numbers in front of the names of the schools on TV for 3.5 hours and across the ticker at the bottom. I mean, if you want to go real tangible, like a lot of coaches in their contracts have bonuses tied to where their teams are ranked. And also, I would say this particular instance is unfortunate. If she had mixed up like Ohio State and Tennessee, or like schools that are used to being there, okay, but like making the top 25 for USF fans is a big deal. Like, this is a source of pride. They have, I don't even, Brock probably knows off the top of his head when the last time they were ranked was. I don't. But it's a big deal. And yes, they did get ranked, but maybe the number would be different, be a little bit higher if she hadn't left them out entirely.
I'm going to, before I ask Ralph a question I have on this, something I thought about a little bit as I was kind of watching this unfold. I mean, I wasn't riveted to it, but just as we had talked about it offline, it's interesting because I think on one hand, if you're looking at this, you're like, man, if she is this flip about this, this is part of her job. And the truth is, it's probably not part of her job in terms of like why she was put on the beat. It's to cover USC and not to keep up on American Conference, versus SEC or whatnot. Now, having said that, once she agreed to do the poll, even if you were I think she was a high school's writer and then got promoted into this job at the Orange County Register, it's like, okay, you got to at least take that part seriously. If you don't accept it. And it's like, Ralph said, it's not like you're getting paid for this extra. So I think that part is noteworthy. It's like, don't do it if you don't understand the responsibility and the pain in the ass part of it that comes with that, right? I will say this, a long time ago, and Stu and I have joked about this both on the podcast and offline a bunch. The assignment I dreaded and just disliked doing the most in 25 plus years of covering college football was bowl projections, because it could be week 2 or week 4, and I'm at an airport Sunday morning, and all of a sudden now I'm finding out some UTEP fan is going, you really think we're going to lose 6 of the last 8? And I'm like, evidently, I don't, but it's just like, you can't put that much effort into, again, this is not us complaining. I don't think, but it's like, people have a lot of different responsibilities that come along with the job they have. And it's like, you end up saying no to a lot of stuff if if you can see it through and go, okay, yeah, that's probably something I really can't take on. That's probably not worth me taking on in addition, because I won't be able to do a very good job on it. And it's just like, I'm sorry, it's like, I got to turn that down or whatever. So where I'm going with this, Ralph, is how hard is it for you when you were like the administrator of the AP Top 25 to actually find the people who can not just do it, but who aren't compromised in some way? Like, I have a buddy out here who you guys all know, Ryan Abraham, longtime USCFootball.com guy. He watches the sport pretty closely, but as I said, he works for USCFootball.com. And I think, if you have somebody who is at I don't want to call it a fan site, but essentially it's like that's they're devoted to one team. I think it walks in with almost like the expectation of some level of bias, whether it's true or not. And so the pool for people that I imagine whoever took over the poll for you, that's probably a challenge that I think most people don't think about as like, who is going to be on this thing?
Okay, yeah, I can definitely get into this because think of like how our industry has shrunk over the years, right? I mean, there's just a lot fewer sports writers than there used to be. So that makes the pool of who can vote and who is available to vote in this thing a lot smaller. The rules used to be you had to be a member of the Associated Press. I don't want to get too deep in this hole, but the Associated Press is a co-op. Newspapers and news organizations are members of the Associated Press. So you had to work for a member organization. There was a time when every news organization was a member of the Associated Press, right? Because of course you were a member of the Associated Press. You needed that news. That has shrunk. There are fewer members. There are big newspapers that no longer use the Associated Press service. Gannett newspapers, for example, which is like USA Today owned in a lot of those. So the pool of who is now, I believe AP for the first year has tweaked that requirement for its voters that they have to be with a member organization. I think they've tried to loosen that a little bit, again, because the pool of who is eligible was getting so small. So that has made it more challenging over the years to find people, because then you have a pool, the pool shrinks. You have to find not only people who are qualified, but people who are willing. And those are basically the same two, those are related, right? Because if you're not really willing to do it, even if you're qualified to do it, if you're not willing to do it, that probably means you're not going to do a good job. So I would always tell my bosses, like, don't twist somebody's arm to do this. If they really don't want to do that, they need to come into this job enthusiastic and excited to do it. And you get a lot of people who are, especially a lot of the younger voters and newer people to the beats and to the profession, because they seize on it as an opportunity to raise their profile and have some good content. So it has been challenging as the pool has shrunk. I can get into minutia about how, the way the vote is laid out, you try to balance it by state, and some states it's harder to find people than others for various reasons of how teams are covered. So just finding the voters over the last 10 years, I did it for about 20, over the last 10 years, has become much more difficult.
My question, Ralph, would be, there was somebody on Twitter that on Tuesday with a pretty big platform saying they shouldn't even be having beat writers vote in the AP poll because they primarily only watch one team play one game on Saturday, and everything else they're probably just looking at box scores. At least that's what this person thought. I don't agree with that, but what's the rationale to do that versus 20? How many voters is it? 60 something?
It's about 62 to 5, depending
people,
on the year. Yeah.
Like the three of us who are watching the entire country every week.
Honestly, I think it's a fair question. I found myself over the last few years thinking that as well. I do wonder, the problem is, like, are there 60 people in the media like us? Does that create a problem because maybe you are not necessarily, you want to get like sort of diverse opinions here and different views of the country to a certain degree. So I understand sort of the regional balance here. That critique of beat writers for certain teams, because you do, again, that goes back, that's an old school thinking. That's the way it always has been. And maybe I think there probably is an argument to be made for thinking more nationally as the way you fill out the voter pool, as opposed to, hey, this is still 1979, right? Or 1995, and we're trying to take in the same approach. So I think that there's a fair discussion to be had on who should vote and how the voter panel should be comprised. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was happening, because I know at the AP, when I left, that there was a lot more discussions about modernizing the way we went about doing the poll. But I think the biggest problem to start with is the industry problem that we just talked about, which is the pool of sports writers is getting small. Right. I mean, if we tried to find six, again, like let's just say, we only want people who cover the sport from a national perspective. How many ESPN people do you want? How many athletic people do you want? Like at a certain point, that probably isn't a great way to fill out a panel either by having, 8 organizations represented. So I think that there are some interesting critiques, and I do think that the folks at the AP are aware that they need to change their ways a little bit to, keep up with the times.
All right, we are going to get to some on-field action here in a second, but first, a quick break. All right, guys, we've been trying to institute some new weekly segments here on the Audible, and one we are trying to get off the ground here is we're going to try to give you, each of us give you a breakout player to keep an eye on during the big games this week. So I will start with you, Bruce.
All right. I'm going to take a guy who has been around for a while. He was on my freaks list like maybe 3 years ago when he was playing at Boise State before Ashton Jeanty became a household name. And then he transferred to Arkansas. And that program's kind of been middling in the SEC. Talon Green is the quarterback. He is 6'6". He's 235. He's off to a really fast start in Bobby Petrino's offense. 10 touchdowns, a lot of big plays. They have an interesting game. They play at Ole Miss. I feel like when these two teams get together, maybe it's the curse of Houston Nutt, but crazy stuff feels like it has the potential to happen. I'm not saying they're going to beat Ole Miss. I could see him making a lot of big plays. And look, Ole Miss had their hands full last week against Kentucky. I think this is a much more dangerous offense they're going up against. I think people are going to be buzzing about Talon Green this weekend, including probably a bunch of NFL personnel people.
Yeah, he's a fun player. And yeah, I remember the first time I saw him at Boise, I was like, who is this guy? Like this is an enormous quarterback who is running really well.
Run, yeah.
Yeah. Remind me to one day tell you about what I was doing the day I could have been covering the, 6-7 overtime Ole Miss game with Matt Jones and Eli Manning. I was in Mississippi at the time. Didn't cover that game because I was on another assignment. We'll maybe save that for that story for another time. My breakout player is also in the SEC, and it's also in one of the bigger games, but not in a big SEC game this week. And that's Cassius Howell, the defensive end from Texas A&M. I've been hearing a lot about him since I made my trip to College Station in the spring. They were kind of hoping, the Aggies were, that he would step into the role as their, sort of where Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart was the end, right? Turner was the defensive tackle. But they had 2 really good defensive ends last year, and both of them moved on to the NFL. And they were thinking like Howell could be the next guy up there. Last week against Utah State, he had, I guess you'd call it, from a baseball perspective, they call it an immaculate inning when you strike out 3 players on 9 pitches. He had, I guess, an immaculate possession. He had 3 sacks on the same possession against Utah State to end the possession.
I'm sorry, Ralph. Have we ever heard that before in a college football game? I'm sure it's happened, but I don't remember ever hearing it.
I don't remember ever seeing it. I've been watching. You've been watching for a long time. I don't know, Stu, if you remember seeing that. Like,
quite coincidentally, it happened in an NFL game on Sunday. Myles Garrett did it. 3 straight plays to Joe Burrow, toward the end of the game. But
another A&M guy, no less.
Yeah, and another A&M guy. Howell and the Aggies have Notre Dame this weekend. I think it's a good platform for him to raise his profile. If they can, I think they're going to need him to be good and put a lot of pressure on CJ Carr, and he'll be facing a pretty good offensive line. So good guy to have in the spotlight.
I think I screwed up this segment already because not only am I going to be the third one to do an SEC player, I also have somebody from Texas A&M. We'll just hit both sides of the ball here for their game against Notre Dame. Casey Concepcion, the receiver who transferred in there from NC State, really fast. Put up a lot of numbers at NC State, but let's be honest, how many people watch NC State football that closely? Now he's got the spotlight, both playing in the SEC and obviously playing against Notre Dame this week. He broke a punt return for a touchdown in their first game. Because he's, you're going to see him on offense and in special teams. One of two really good transfer receivers they picked up this year. Actually, Mario Craver is putting up bigger numbers, the guy from Mississippi State. So at this point, we have a lot riding on Texas A&M actually playing well in this game. It is time to get to the mailbag. As always, you can send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. And this one is from Chris in Darien, Connecticut, who says, Bruce, you stopped me dead in my tracks just now listening to the Week 2 reaction show. Pitt with the best uniforms in college football? He has a exclamation point, no, question, exclamation point, question, exclamation point. I went back and hit rewind 3 times to make sure I heard it right. Hard disagree, but thought it was a good prompt for a mailbag question. Bruce, Stu, and Ralph, give me your top 3 uniforms in college football. He breaks the ice and says in no particular order, Penn State, Colorado, and Ole Miss.
Okay. Let me explain more on, and Ralph, I feel like you will land similar with this with me. So the era where I really kind of discovered college football and it became something I loved was in the 80s. And the 80s, Pitt was rolling. At the start of the 80s, you had, obviously Tony Dorsett became Tony Dorsett, Hugh Green, Ricky Jackson, a bunch of dudes, Chris Dolman. And I don't know. I just like seeing the script Pitt. It felt like a comfort food to me. And I'm glad they brought it back because I know they went to a bunch of different other things. And because it went away and they brought it back, I just like it. It reminds me of college football. So I'm guilty of that. Ralph, you're going to
I think the only reason why I wouldn't have Pitt on my list, because I do think the return of what they have now. For years, they were sort of in this weird space of like messing around with their colors a little bit. And what they have now is pretty fire. But the only reason why I wouldn't put them is only because you already mentioned them. Number 1 for me with a bullet, and this is like 2 and 3, I could probably, if you ask me tomorrow, I could give you 2 different ones. I think the best uniform in college football is UCLA. That UCLA gold helmet, almost any combination, and it kills me. I just want to jump through the television when they have like the black and when they mess with it.
When they went black, by the way, for a while, Jim Mora, from the people who were never around after, they said Jim was not a huge fan of that color.
Good.
And it's like, well, you took the job and you're going to go there. So.
Well, anyways, yes, I think UCLA's combination of helmets, and again, almost any combination of the light blue with the gold and white just looks absolutely fabulous. I would probably have Penn State on there too, because I love the exact opposite, like I know exactly what that is. Super plain. I love the fact that it's very minimalist. And the third one, I could probably jump around from here to there. He mentioned Colorado. I do like black uniforms, and I've always said the best black uniforms are San Diego State's. I can think of like the Marshall Faulk era, and players look fast in those uniforms. So I don't know. Again, like the other 2, I could probably change my mind a bunch, but I will go like a diverse spectrum there with my 3 of like UCLA with traditional, but also has a lot of color in it. I'll go Penn State with his very minimalist, and I'll go a little off the radar with the all black San Diego States.
I am also a fan of UCLA. I just think, they're my number 1 as well.
How can you not?
It's just like the perfect shade of blue and gold contrasting together. The coolest, I think you guys will agree, the coolest uniform game of the year is when USC and UCLA both wear the home uniforms. It's like,
no doubt.
It's what HD or whatever it is now. What acronym are we on now? We're past HD, right? 4K. It's what 4K. These TVs were built for, is the colors radiating off those uniforms. Number 2 for me is Texas. I think burnt orange is such a unique color. Nobody else has it. And the helmets, I think, contrast to that nicely, the white helmets. Number 3, there were several schools I considered. I considered Colorado. I considered the simple, iconic Michigan, Penn State, Alabama. I'm going to go with LSU. it is the rare instance, right, where the white uniform is the dominant uniform over the colored uniform. And those stripes are just so recognizable. It's like, and actually I would put them, Ralph, in that category of like, I just associate those jerseys with really fast receivers and cornerbacks. Like when you think LSU, you think fast guys.
Let me just throw one thing in about LSU, and that is I love, and they don't wear these often because they only wear them, I think, for non-conference games. The purple LSU uniforms are one of the things that made me fall, like the purple jerseys are one of the things that made me fall in love with college football. They have like a certain combination that they only wear for essentially like non-conference home games. And I don't think they wear them for every non-conference home game because you don't see them very often. And I love those uniforms.
For me, I said Pitt. I really like Oregon's uniforms. I think they are just, I don't love every combination they have, but I just think the silver helmets, it's just a really unique place. And it just feels like college football in the modern era. I've got a wild card one that's grown on me fast, and that is Tulane. They're unique. They're goofy. They're kind of weird. It's a blue-green color scheme. You almost never see that in anything. Yeah. It's just kind of, their green wave kind of has a little bit of a blob quality to it. But,
the angry wave.
Yeah, I kind of like it. It's just goofy, and it kind of fits in college football, I think. The one we didn't say, which to me is like the signature helmet, although I watched a Delaware game the other day and, in the spirit of Tubby Raymond, we saw the Michigan helmet, like two different ways. It's just such a distinctive one. I know people are going to go, how come you guys didn't say Notre Dame or whatever? I will say this. Some Army-Navy games have produced some really awesome uniforms. Mm-hmm. And, I'm trying to remember there was one I really liked. I think it was a camouflage one that they had done probably like 4 or 5 years ago, which I really liked. But there's a lot of great ones to choose from.
Can we do some hate mail? Wait, can we throw ourselves out there and open ourselves up for hate mail? Do you want to give me one quick I really don't like that.
Yeah, I just was thinking we should do our ugliest. Yeah, I
have one. Okay. I do not like the Michigan State like blotchy numbered, like green on green. It just, I like East Lansing. Like Jonathan Smith. For whatever reason, that jersey was like, it feels like something I might have designed if I was like not like, oh yeah, this font's out of size. This doesn't line up or whatever. It just feels kind of. And Notre Dame's had a couple of really clunkers. I feel like when they've tried to make special ones too. I feel like
Notre Dame is one where you said, oh, why, Ralph, like why don't we? Notre Dame's helmets, I think we can agree, are probably the best in the sport. But if you do too many alternate uniforms, then I can't really say you have the best uniform, because if you had the best uniform, why do you keep changing it up?
So anyone that you don't like then in particular?
I have a aversion to anybody that's too brown, because I just feel like if your primary color,
so you don't like Bowling Green.
If your primary color is close to poop, it's not really aesthetically pleasing. And so I think there's several I could put in there, but I think Purdue might be the most personify that the most. They lean heavily on that. I guess you could say Iowa to some extent, but I feel like they more play up the yellow or the gold, I guess.
Looks like
that's an interesting one you just said. Wyoming, they are it might be them.
They definitely lean into the brown. I find it appealing. So that one, and I'll definitely get mail for this. I've never really loved Tennessee's orange and the really big numbers. They used to do that. I think they kind of still do that a little bit. Like the Tennessee, it's an iconic look. So it often looks good in the setting of a game compared to its opponent. Like it's a good pop, but I don't know. It's just never really done anything for me.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm sure the hate mail is coming from those fan bases, but yeah. Let's take another quick break. We've got some good mailbag questions to get to after the break.
All right, and we're back. We're going to finish up this mailbag. Got a couple more questions to go. This one, hi guys. It seems that for the past few years, the SEC has had average bowl results with a question mark after average. So even the emailer is conceding that, we have to determine what average means, followed by average results in early non-conference games. Certainly not bad by any means, but not world-beating either. But by the end of every season, the narrative that it's the best and deepest conference always emerges. Has there in fact been a drop-off in on-field results? Or is this just perception? And if there has, why? And if ever, do you think that perception will start to change? Thanks as always, John Skulski, who's chiming in from Spain. I didn't realize you guys had like an international following. That's pretty cool.
We do. I know personally of a couple listeners abroad, but also we occasionally get some questions from various locales. Okay, guys, I looked up the numbers for this, and I have to say, I think maybe people are just so desperate and hoping the SEC is down, or that they look for instance, right? They had two losses in notable games in week one, right? The Texas and Alabama games. But in general, no, there is no indication there's been a downturn other than one season 2 years ago. So last year, the SEC, and this is combining non-conference and postseason. And keep in mind, there were more postseason games last year because of the playoff. Last year, the SEC went 20-11 against Power 4 opponents. That was the best. They did have a down year the year before that. In 2023, they were 12-13. Believe it or not, the Pac-12 in its last season had the best record of any conference that year. And then you go back before that, 17-9, 13-10, 16-8. So you say, okay, well, what about this season so far, right? They got off to a bad start. No, actually, the SEC is 8-2 so far against Power 4 teams. Last week, in fact, as we know, they, or as you may have, it may have snuck up on you guys, but last week they won all their Power 4 non-conference games. So I'm not seeing any evidence that if there is if anything, maybe the perception has now gone the other way, where everybody thinks the SEC is overrated, and in fact, the data says they're not.
I think what has happened, it's the top line stuff, right? For the first time in feels like forever, they have not won the national title. Their biggest rival, the Big Ten, has won the last two national titles. So I think, a lot of times that's the headliner, biggest game. The kind of aura of dominance has been cracked somewhat in that regard. And I think because there's no Nick Saban, and you see Alabama, which has been the gold standard of college football for the last decade plus, they're reeling right now. And to some degree, we're going to find out Georgia has a big game at Tennessee. But like last year, we saw Notre Dame take it to them. We saw Marcus Freeman out coach Kirby Smart. And I think when your headliner programs, now look, Texas is relatively new to the SEC, but they've come within a game of plan for the national title, right? And so I just think that because it's a Georgia where they were winning back-to-back national titles and going for a three-peat, and Alabama where they were doing everything they were doing, it's not quite the same thing. On a smaller level, when you see like Florida's and a ranked Florida team lose to USF, that probably, you're kind of looking for signs if you're somebody trying to make that argument, and there's one, so, and I don't think it was like embarrassing, certainly, that Texas lost to Ohio State, but that was the most high profile game we've had so far. And that was another one that kind of went against the SEC. So I think that's why the perception probably is what it is, even if the reality and the numbers don't back it up.
Yeah. The other thing is keep looking at the draft numbers. Those are important. And I know the Big Ten closed the gap a little bit this past year. Now they have more teams, so that they have a few more players drafted. But the SEC still tends to dominate in that field, and that essentially means that that's where the best players tend to be, is in the SEC. I also think it's there's an SEC fatigue here too. So people, as you said, are looking for cracks in the armor. I also think there's this. I think, and this is where the critique becomes somewhat fair. I think to a certain degree, people get tired of hearing our 10th team is better than your second team. Now, Arizona State just lost to Mississippi State, so that didn't look good, as far as that argument. But for many years, you would hear things like Ohio State couldn't play in our league, or Ohio State would would lose 3 games in our league, right? Well, that's kind of silly. So I think it's that the SEC sort of extremism, right? I fell down a rabbit hole of a Louisville, Kentucky thread on when I was scrolling through Twitter yesterday. Louisville pounded Kentucky last year, and you had Kentucky fans still talking about, well, we play in the SEC, and what would our record be in the ACC? And you had Louisville fans like jumping in, being like, wait a second, what would your record be in the ACC? We beat you by 3 touchdowns last year. So I think because the SEC often comes across over arrogant, like very arrogant in their dominance, with their dominance, they sort of overstate it, even though it's pretty well documented, but sometimes it's so overstated, it's easy to then point back to their flaws and say, here, this is an example that you're not as good as you think you are. Not that you're not good, but you're not as good as you think you are.
I have one other little anecdotal point on this too. So our colleague Pete Sampson, who does a great job covering Notre Dame, did a Shane Gillis story today that I read, and it's a really good story, and kind of gives Notre Dame a little more, adds to the Marcus Freeman cool vibe around Notre Dame these days. But in the story, it gets into a little bit of like the little sniping between him and Nick Saban, and about the comments he had made on ESPN a year or so ago. And it gets into the, okay, now, like, wink, wink, when SEC used to be able to pay people under the table and you're getting all these great players, now everybody's able to pay. And so I think it does, that perception is all of a sudden like, okay, now everybody's playing by different rules than they were when the SEC was winning everything. And whether that's the God's honest truth or not, I think there's some credibility to that, because we're just seeing, a lot of really good players end up at other programs, not just the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now what you're seeing is that the very top of the SEC has started to come back a little bit, because you can't hoard the talent the way you could 5-10 years ago. And obviously the Big Ten proved it. I mean, the last 2 years, their best teams beat the SEC's best teams in the most meaningful games of the season. I think, though, when you're looking at those two conferences in particular, the gap starts to show up the further down you go, right? Now, I'm not going to say their 10th place team can beat your second. Like, that's too extreme. But I think like last weekend was a pretty good window into what I'm talking about, where you had, programs that you would consider to be in the same zip code, I guess is the way to put it. And they all went toward the SEC. Vanderbilt beats Virginia Tech. Obviously, Oklahoma beat Michigan, which wasn't all that shocking. But, I would say Michigan was probably higher in fact, I know they were higher in the Big Ten, preseason predictions than Oklahoma was in the SEC. Obviously, you guys mentioned Mississippi State over ASU, and then Missouri over Kansas. Missouri's considered bottom of the upper half in the SEC. So, and then middle. You contrast that with the ACC. The ACC, unfortunately, is 3-9 against Power 4 teams so far. So I think we hit everything on that question?
I think so. I think we'll, and everybody will call us SEC homers, and that we have SEC bias. And what are you going to do? They're good. They're still
what
good.
I always say to that is, we're not making it up out of thin air. I mean, there's data. There's all this data, whether it's schedule strength rankings, NFL draft rankings, these numbers I just told you, that say they're pretty darn good.
Okay, guys, the last question is from Brad. Money well spent, ? What are your thoughts on a school like Duke spending $4 million on a quarterback when the stadium is mostly empty while playing the number 11 ranked Illinois team? And that's a reported $4 million, by the way. That's what he's putting in. The school doesn't need the advertising a good football team can bring. They aren't hurting for applications, and the school is small, plus tuition is a tad on the high side, and they get more from basketball anyway. They aren't truly going to be able to compete for a national championship, especially if they spend most of their money on a quarterback. So why are they wasting money? Stu, why do you think?
Funny, this question should come in this week. I have been immersed in Duke and Darian Mensah and big contracts for a couple weeks here. And that story, I believe by the time this episode comes out, that story will be up on The Athletic. Okay, first of all, guys, this is stuff we talk about offline all the time, but this gives a good window into it, how hard it is to report dollar figures, accurate dollar figures and NIL deals. That figure, the 2-year, $8 million contract, has been out there since December when CBS Sports first wrote it. It is obviously accepted as fact. And after talking to pretty much everybody involved in it, I still don't know if it's fact or not. I mean, you got people on the player side, and look, this is true in general, right? Like the agents and the lawyers, it's in their best interest for the best number possible to get out there, insist it's 100% accurate. People on the Duke side say, well, we're not going to give you the exact number, but it's not that, or it's very incentive laden. So what I've come to conclude is that it's very high, right? He is probably getting in the $3 million range guaranteed, but then he has to hit certain incentives to get up to 4. So why I phrased it in the story is he's one of the 3 or 4 highest paid players in the country. And yes, that is why I was interested in it in the first place. How is Duke, of all schools, a school paying this much money for a quarterback? I think, and it's not just him. They've upped their investment quite a bit in football. They had other good transfers in this class. They look at it as a matter of survival. They see what's happening with the ACC. They know there's going to be another round of realignment at some point. If Florida State and Clemson might leave, maybe it's even more radical than that, and it's the Super League. And as much as people associate Duke with basketball doesn't pay the bills, football does. And it would be very bad for Duke if there was some sort of Super League and they said, yeah, Duke's not that good in football, who cares? They're gone. Now, will Darian Mensah single-handedly deliver them to become the next Oregon or Clemson, somebody that kind of built up their reputation over the years? That's a lot to ask of a guy. Their first big test against Illinois, as Brad alluded to, did not go so well. They lost by a lot of points, even though he actually looked good, except he had 3 turnovers. They play his old school Tulane this week. And the last thing is, I was a little surprised when the cameras panned out and you saw how many empty seats were there, because this was the number 11 team in the country coming to play. Obviously, Mensah's been getting buzz all offseason. And by the way, they went 9-3 last year. But, Duke, much like my alma mater, Stanford out here, like, it's hard to fill the stadium unless the team is really good. And I think probably the fans there are waiting for them to show a little bit more than, we're like a above average ACC team. So, yeah, I'll throw it to you guys. Is it money well spent?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I compared it. So myself and our colleague Brendan Marks combined on a story on, can Bill Belichick turn North Carolina into a football school? And I referenced Duke investing in Mensah. And we had a section in that story that sort of related to what you just said, Stu. North Carolina's play is to make sure they're not left behind. And their play is on a coach. They're investing heavily in this coach to try to elevate the football program and show that they are serious about football, because within the next 5 to 6 years, we're not sure what the structure of major college football is going to be like, and nobody wants to be left behind. So I think it's a somewhat similar mindset. It's a different kind of investment, but it's a similar mindset in showing that we need to invest and show that we are serious about football. And I would also say, I think that a lot of schools invest in coaches. And I find myself thinking, your ceiling is probably 6-6 or 7-5 or 8-4 anyway. Like I thought back to when Purdue at some point made Jeff Brom, I think the 2nd or 3rd highest paid coach in the Big Ten, to which I thought that's awesome that Purdue is keeping him and that they're sort of striving to be the best they can. But they also made an enormous investment on a program that probably has about an 8-win ceiling now. So how smart is that investment when it's not going to get you to compete with Ohio State and Michigan? And that is what really, Bruce, what a lot of these schools are sort of are wrestling with. We have to make these big investments, but at what cost when we're not elevating ourselves to truly elite championship levels?
So you made this thing turn a little bit, because I want to get back to Stu's point. But when you said Purdue, who's Purdue's biggest rival? Kurt Cignetti went in and did stuff like, I think Jeff Brom, I think you guys agree, Jeff Brom's one of the best coaches in college football. I'm not saying he's definitely a better coach than Curt Cignetti, but Curt Cignetti just did something like that I think would make people say, hey, if you get the right coach and the circumstances line up, you can make the playoff. You can make the playoff. Can you win a national title? Maybe a different story, right? But like, I think that's the part that, and again, I don't think there was anybody on that Indiana roster who anybody would say is a top 10 player. The part that's kind of like, whoa, to me about this is I did a big Lenora Sellers story. I don't think anybody would think, oh, Darian Mensah is anywhere near as good Lenora Sellers. That Lenora Sellers, according to what his dad told me, people were offering him $4 million a year to leave South Carolina. Getting back to the Mensah piece of it, I'm like, first of all, I'm like so suspicious of numbers getting reported on these because they get thrown out by like agents who are basically new to this field, and it's an open field. You have a lot of agents who are charging not 2 and 3% like what you see in professional sports, but charging 20, 25%, including like, I think the agents involved in the Mensah case had some really kind of icky comments
Darian
about
Mensah's
how much
agent,
they were charging and why they were charging.
Agent went on a podcast, I think early this year, and said all college NIL agencies are charging 20%, and defended it as well because we're dealing with smaller contracts than the NFL agents are. Right.
Which is ridiculous because they're getting less. So you're taking more
a higher percentage that you can
from
make
players.
Anyway, that's a whole other topic.
But my point on this, Stu, is also like, we don't like if Curt Cignetti or Kirby Smart or whoever, when they do a deal, it doesn't get reported as, okay, this is all they could make. You're not putting incentives into the bottom line of what it is. So, we had a story on a 5-star offensive line recruit, committed to Texas Tech, and the numbers were different than what initially got reported. And our sources, which we, really stand by on this, were like, the number isn't what was reported, because the agents, as I said, they're all new to this. They're all trying to build their business. They're all trying to lure new clients. Hey, I got that kid $4 million a year. You ought to go with me. Like, they're trying to reset the market. And that's why I think it's very suspicious. And it's like, who is Duke really bidding against for $4 million a year for Darian Mensah? Right? That seems kind of questionable. It seems a little baffling, to be honest. But, whether it's worth it for them or not, I mean, only time will tell, I guess. But like, if you're telling me he's going to be Cam Newton, you're telling me he's going to be Lenora Sellers, who can be like a program changer like that. Like you said, Ralph, they won 9 games, and the quarterback that they won 9 games with last year, ended up, getting nudged to Corvallis. Right. So I don't know. I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But right now it's, I would take everything in this space that gets put out there in this particular, space with a couple of grains of salt.
Can I flip it back to you though quickly, Bruce? Because you mentioned this is why you're right. The Braum example that I use was really made during a 14 playoff era, right? When Purdue's not making a 14 playoff, right?
Nor would have Indiana wouldn't have either.
And nor would Indiana. But I think you're right. I think the level of investment now, the bar that you're shooting for. And if you're Duke, you might think Darian Mensah might not be one of the 4 best quarterbacks in the country, but he's one of the 4 or 5 best available. And if we could have the Indiana season, and if this kid can provide us with the Indiana season, that's the holy grail for us, right? The bar has been lowered to what we are aspiring to. No, not that it's a low bar, but now we're aspiring to be in that 12-team playoff. And if Indiana can do it with, if Indiana can do it with the right coach, team, schedule, breaks, everything sort of comes together, why can't we do it? So yes, 4 million or 3 million or whatever the hell the number is becomes worthwhile because that's the target.
And if you can make the CFP, like that's a game changer. I mean, think about Pitt, right? The year with Kenny Pickett, like they played in the Peach Bowl and he opted out. If that had been now, they would have made the playoff. That would have been a big, big deal for Pitt football. But the last thing I would just say is, I think the problem schools are going to deal with now is like, do we spend the money on the coach like UNC did, or do we spend the money on the players? And the answer is you got to do both, because you could put, peak era Nick Saban at Duke, but if he doesn't have a quarterback, like there's only so much he's gonna be able to do, right? But also if we put 2019 Joe Burrow at Duke and give him a crappy coach, there's only so far they're gonna go. So it really takes both. We gotta decide who gets the Trader Joe's gift card, the $12 Trader Joe's gift card. We did have, I think, 3 good questions. We went into depth on all of them. Bruce, who's your vote?
Who asked the non-uniforms question? Not because he bashed my pit commentary, but what was the second question you got?
The SEC perception
in Spain, reality. No less. Hopefully, there's a Trader Joe's there.
Oh yeah.
So is that what you're going for? You're going for the SEC question?
It sounds like you're very derisive.
No, I'm saying is that your picks, Bruce? Is your pick the SEC question for question of the week?
I just thought that it was a honest discussion about what's real and why it's, why the perceptions might be creeping in a certain way.
Yeah, I'm going to go with yeah, that's a good point. And Stu really did a good job of researching there.
Stu did his homework
but I
there.
did like the. We got to give Stu a pat on the back here when he comes up clutch, man. Like
the one time I came the most prepared. Don't
be so hard on the guy, Bruce. Jeez, man. I actually like the uniform question because it's fun to talk about uniforms. So I'm going to go with question number 1. And that means, Stu, you get to break the tie.
That's why we do it this way now. We're always going to be able to break the tie. I'm going with Chris and Darren, Connecticut. I thought the uniform question was fun. And I promised I was going to do it anyway. I was going to pick him. But I will say there are no Trader Joe's in Europe. So that would have been... we would not. I don't even think we would have mailed the card to Spain, to be perfectly honest. So, Chris, you are our winner. Please send your mailing address to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. You and the rest of you can always send your questions there. And remember, the Audible on Sundays is live streamed on YouTube. You can join us. Our channel is @Audible Show. We will be going live. You are looking live at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 a.m. Pacific to wrap up week 3. We'll see you next time.